Alrighty, welcome to Nyquist RPG, and today we have something very special for you. This is an episode of, drumroll please, Armchair Safari. Ooh. That means today we're going to be looking at one of the age-old mysteries of role-play games, given the fact that I'm ages old. I'm Jonathan Albin, and I've got 50 years of game mastery experience, constant for all of the time since I began playing when I was 11 years old, long, long ago. And today we're going to ask the age-old question, how much reality do you want in your fantasy? It's like the old Reese's commercial, and again, from my time frame, from my young world. There were two individuals walking down the street, one of them with a spoon into a peanut butter jar, going, peanut butter, and the other one walking the other direction, chewing on a block of chocolate, going, chocolate, and they collide, and there's a big crashing sound, and of course the chocolate ends up stuck in the peanut butter, and the other one's got a chunk of the peanut butter on his spoon and says, "You've got chocolate in my peanut butter." And the other one says, "You've got peanut butter in my chocolate." And the two of them munch down, and great surprise, they like both of them. Two great tastes that taste great together. So the question is, how much realism do you want in your role-play game? How much do you want of reality in your fantasy? And it's an age-old question. Players have been challenged back and forth on this I don't know how many times. I would say every session, or at least every campaign when it starts, there's usually one or two players that either they want more of the one or they want less of that one and more of the other. And the two of them have to wrestle just about every campaign to figure out what the duality equality should be. We're going to look at that today. We're going to talk about some of the ways that games in the past have resolved them, and we're going to talk about perhaps why that we want one or the other in preference to the opposite. So role-play games are, of course, generally set in a fantasy setting. When we speak of the granddaddy of them all, Dungeons and Dragons, it definitely is in the fantasy environment, but you just be surprised how much that they attempted to bring realism into the role-play game. It can be seen either direction. Either it's something that you want to include so that it makes you feel more real, more visceral to you, or conversely, it is a burden you're trying to escape from, and role play is a way to be an escapist at the very least. And so it comes down to, generally, there are some statistics or some values that are considered to be usual and customary in terms of what you make real. One of the obvious ones is the dimension, how physically far you are from each other, how far you are from the target, how far the nemesis is from your position and where you're trying to get to. And all of these distances, especially in a theater of the mind environment, can be very, very confusing. And so there are certain ways of saying things that provide some form of usual and customary realism to the scene to make it something that is visceral, that you can actually put your toes in the sand, so to speak. And these things that are considered usual and customary are kind of the things you would find if you were on a safari. The clues and evidence and estimated realities, especially those that can be conveyed verbally and generally as quickly as possible, because the amount of time you spend in uncertainty, the less time you have to get around to fixing whatever the issues are. Pardon me for grumbling a noise there for a second to get my device out. So this concept of usual or customary, in addition to dimension, generally has to do with what I call the establishing shot. And this is a term used in movies and in photography. Wow, I said that weird. Wherein you are giving a locational referent from which you're going to progress, but the players can at least remember where we are and what we are visually seeing as a backdrop or in the background. And so the establishing shot has to be as clear as possible. So usually a storyteller or a game master will spend a considerable amount of time going over the details of the physical locale. This will be climate information, and we've gone over this before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But it's going to be all the details that will make you aware of where you are in reference to everything else in the space of the encounter. And in addition to usual and customary distances and whatever, you generally also already have a very pretty clear, that's pretty funny, a fairly clear picture of the genre, setting, locale that you are role playing in. But these usual and customary sometimes aren't enough for a player, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is what elements might come in that a player will need to hold on to that may be in excess of what is usual and customary. So, simple exposition is an easy process. You simply say what you would see, and you would describe everything you can remember or think of. As a matter of fact, what I do is I have a checklist of the who, what, when, where, why, the simple exposition. And then I also have a separate list for the things that I want to include that will add that slight level of improved sensory input. And that word is defined as verisimilitude. And yes, I know I'm using some big words today, and I get accused of that quite often. But verisimilitude is those things. If you think about it, it's very similar. So verisimilitude is those things that make a scene more realistic, more tangible, more identifiable, and expressible. So the difference between a simple exposition and a one that has more verisimilitude in it is generally going to come down to the amount of time that you take to describe it. The more time you spend, the more exposition you're providing. Now, that still is a matter of differentiation in terms of the very vocabulary. We have a screen coming up pretty soon that'll make this pretty clear. But the idea is that an exposition of the scene gives the player just the facts, just the definition, and the verisimilitude is what makes it feel more natural or normal. Of course, the combatant or opposite side of that is how much information is too information. If you spend, how much information is too much information, is what I meant to say. When you spend conversational time going over simple details and you overburden it or take too long to express it or require your players to give you question and answer kind of feedback about what they are missing or what they can't yet understand, this process can throw the game's reality out the window in terms of experience. Yes, it may be more accurate. Yes, you may be able to process the description to a greater degree. But ironically, that itself can be harmful to the roleplay experience because now you're literally lifting off the table, backing up. It's like you've been seeing me play with this object, but you really can't tell what it is until I spend some time to bring it up and let it turn in front of you so you can see that it's a icosahedron, or there's another word for it, extended pentagram, double, I can't remember. There's a math term for it, but it's a 20-sided dice without any sides. It's just kind of like a game master's mind. It's just a twisting whirl of interlinking connections. But we don't want to spend too much time giving you an explanation. We want you to be able to visualize it. And so if I say to you, what you see suspended in front of you is a frame-based 20-sided die without any numbers, you might be able to get a better understanding of it. But my point is that I can spend a lot of informational time giving you greater detail on that, but whereas I could simply say that it's a brass 20-sided dice without any actual sides punched in. That it's just the wireframe. Now, the difference between those two really comes down to the who, what, when, where, why, how of the scene. Giving the establishing shot and then making sure in that establishing shot I give you the answers to these questions. Pardon me. I generally have finished my job. I've done what I needed to do to get the information across to you. Now, if I wanted to add verisimilitude with this, I would do so by describing it in frame of reference of the very genre we're playing in. So, for example, let's take an individual standing on a street corner in a fantasy setting. Well, first of all, I'm going to describe the street as a lane. I might describe the individual as a pauper. I may describe him as wearing rather shabby clothing with a rather large wooden cudgel in his hand. And he's leaning heavily upon the cudgel, so more than likely you're talking about a person of age. Now, he does have this large brimmed hat on, so you really can't make much about his face, but we definitely tell that it's a male figure standing there, seeming to be waiting for you. Well, that's what I might say in that case, but if we were doing a pirate adventure, then I might say you instead see a hand at the end of the dock awaiting perhaps the turning of the tide, looking listlessly port and starboard, trying to determine whether or not he will be accosted here or whether he will be foundering, waiting for more time to pass. The difference of the terminology gives a difference of nuance that gives additional clues and information about the individual without giving it all away. It did add some realism, it did added some ambiance, but it didn't break the scene, and I didn't take too long to describe the words. Now, if I don't have a very strong vocabulary in that topic, perhaps I will use more audacious words and whatever, but the point is that you want to get through the information in such a way that you add the realism of the scene without overburdening it. This really brings you back to WWGJD. And of course, most people are going to look at that and say, what would God or Jesus do? That might be a way to take that. But really what you need to use is whatever would get the job done. If you are playing with a group of players and they are all playing in a piratey setting, even if they also are not piratey people, perhaps they don't have any knowledge of sailing at all, giving just an information such as a scalawag or a scurvy dog or whatever as a term to refer to the individual that gives across to them the idea that this is a piratey looking individual. It's done its job. I didn't have to go into port, starboard, my own lexicon, if you will, of words that are appropriate for the scene. Not that I won't, but that you don't, that really all you need to do is convey the information that would get the job done. Now, the person who likes their reality in their fantasy would much prefer the use of terms that would be appropriate, and so more than likely they, having chosen that course, more than likely do know the words for what you would call that individual, whether it be a mate or a scalawag or a seaman or a sailor, or, there's all kinds of different terms that could be there. So a person who focuses on that really wants more realism. But notice that it doesn't take more mechanics. You don't have to add another layer of whether or not he smells of the sea, whether or not the individual has indeed a tattoo on the back of his hand, and whether that would be period accurate. You don't have to belabor the point, is what I'm getting at. And so when you are looking for realism in the game, just realize whatever would get the job done is what you want to include. All of this comes down to use your words. The more you focus on the actual terminology for the genre, for the theme, for the setting you're playing in, the more you can transfer that information easily, quickly, and with maintenance of the verisimilitude of that scene. You want to, if a person is into, for example, a great deal of combat acumen, they want to know whether the strike is coming in high or low, whether it's a parry or a riposte, whether the person has expertise in swordsmanship or if he's just flailing with a big metal stick. These are all things that you can convey utilizing proper terms for them. If you describe the individual as a proficient swordsman in the dueling community, that gives a certainly different impression than if you said he was a regular in his king's high infantry. So the idea is that using vocabulary, you can actually build up the information that you want to with fewer words and yet gain more verisimilitude. I'll say it one more time. In the game, and that is the parts that make the game feel real. And I've said that you need to make the story make sense. But now I'm also adding to make the story make sense, you also need to make it feel real. And that's really what the players are looking for. What we all are looking for is an experience in a scene that plays out in our head that feels exactly like the environment we're hoping to see when we started to play a role-playing game. Now, the big question, of course, is when to say, enough said, roll the dice. The purpose of the establishing shot, the way you describe the scene, is intended to answer the majority of your players' questions without them having to actually verbalize the question. And if there are questions, we need to be as succinct as we can be in answering them to reduce the amount of time that we are disconnected from the actual action of the scene. But this can be a lifesaver, because if a player didn't get a clear understanding of where the scene was, and one more question would clear it up, that differentiation is more than enough to justify answering and extending your time in that initial description phase, because the player's satisfaction with the scene is going to be dependent upon whether or not they got the full picture. So make sure that you create the establishing spot with the who, what, why, when, where, and how in your head, so that when a player asks a question, you can respond to which of those questions they were asking about in the shortest possible situation, to make sure that the game feels real and that your story makes sense. Alright, I want to thank you for being here today. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG. If you haven't yet, hit all the buttons down below, because we need the algorithm to know that you're part of our audience and that we're all in this together to make your games great again and make your games really stand out on your table every time you play. As I often say, great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos.